Right now, the world is in shock as the Ukrainian armed forces have closed a deadly cauldron, trapping the Russian army in the Batskaya trap. Donbas is stuck in screams and panic, with the occupiers falling by the hundreds. Meanwhile, Putin emerged from his bunker and managed to embarrass himself in the West in 2025. Footage of his disgrace has gone viral online. You have to see it. Trump in London is making a decision that could turn the tide of the war. British fighter jets are already in the sky. Lavrov blurted out a global threat, but the Russians in disgrace have shut down their training grounds in Belarus. NATO has seized Russian ships and partisans have paralyzed Moscow's logistics. Scandal. Trump harshly criticized Europe. And all this is for Ukraine. The internet exploded. The final blow. Drones in the armed forces did the incredible. This is Ukraine's triumph. Total collapse in Russia. This is only the beginning of Moscow's downfall. All of this is covered in our episode Hotspot. It happened. The armed forces slammed shut a hellish cauldron. This is the death of the Russian army. The Russians were driven into a trap. There are screams and panic. A harsh reckoning in a Donbas. Azov is literally grinding Putin's soldiers into mince. This unexpected turn will bring the occupiers to their knees. What is happening on the front lines right now? Watch.
Ukraine's defense forces have delivered powerful strikes against Russian command posts in Donetsk region. Enemy personnel, including officers and command staff, specifically the headquarters of the Center Group of Forces and the 41st Combined Arms Army, came under fire and suffered losses. These formations have been deployed by the Kremlin right now to one of the most intense sectors near Pokrovsk. The strike itself was carried out back on September 8th. However, information about its scale and result has only just become known. Notably, just a few days before the attack on August 28th, these same headquarters were inspected by Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov. He was supposed to demonstrate control over the situation everywhere. However, Ukrainian missiles turned the command post into ruins.
Strikes on these military targets have significantly disrupted the command and control of Russian armed forces units and subunits. Ukraine's defense forces continue to deliver precise strikes against the aggressor's targets, in order to force the Russian Federation to end its war of aggression.
Meanwhile, the occupiers' futile plans to seize the Donetsk region have been shattered by the strength and coordination of the Ukrainian army. The enemy turned out to be unprepared for either the strategy or the resistance. And Ukrainian troops have moved on to liberate settlements, systematically driving the Russians out of their occupied positions, turning their attempts at seizure into complete defeat. Ukrainian defenders managed to literally cut off the so-called pincers in the area where the occupiers had broken through the defense forces' positions. During the counteroffensive, 7 settlements were liberated, including Pankovka, in the area captured by the enemy. The Russians' attempts to gain a foothold in these territories turned out to be a complete failure. This operation was carried out by the 225th Separate Assault Regiment with the support of National Guard units from the 1st Azov Corps.
Everyone was involved in eliminating this breakthrough, and within a few days it was neutralized. The defensive operation is still ongoing and they are clearing them out.
During the fighting, the Russian army found itself in a real hellish cauldron and suffered significant losses. According to the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense, up to 100,000 personnel are involved. Now the Kremlin is trying to send in its best fighters to unblock the encircled units, but the outcome is still predetermined.
Thanks to Ukraine's highly effective defense in this particular direction, it was ultimately possible to establish an operational encirclement of the Russian units, which were then completely cut off from their logistical supply bases.
But they are not only holding the line, they are also launching active counterattacks. Ukrainian fighters on the Dobropilya front are literally sweeping away all enemy attempts to hold their positions and impose their chaos.
During the latest successful counteroffensive actions, Ukraine's defense forces recaptured another settlement, Podkivka, which once again significantly strengthened the positions of Ukraine's defense forces and prevented the Russian occupiers from carrying out their plans to block the encircled Russian groups and, accordingly, to advance deeper into Ukrainian territory toward the administrative border with the Dnipropetrovsk region. The situation is difficult and changes literally every hour, but it should be noted that at the moment there is no threat of further breakthrough by Russian occupation forces in this direction toward the administrative borders of Dnipropetrovsk region.
The defense forces are also conducting successful counterattacks in the Pokrovsk direction. We are talking about two settlements, Novoekonomichne and Dakhne. This has removed the issue of an operational encirclement in the Pokrovsk direction from the agenda. In addition, there have been tactical successes in the area of the settlement of Razina.
The settlement of Razina. There was a buildup of a small group of Russian occupiers with the aim of further breaking through toward the settlement of Rodinska. What's interesting here is the possibility of establishing direct control over the only paved road. Essentially, this is the main location of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. In other words, it was about the possibility of the operational encirclement of the Ukrainian Defense Forces and, accordingly, blocking the logistics of the Ukrainian defenders. At this moment, these scenarios of the Russian occupying forces have failed.
In addition, the defense forces are conducting counter-sabotage operations, destroying small assault groups that managed to break through and tried to gain a foothold in the urban area. Ukrainian troops have also recaptured the settlement of Filia on the administrative border between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions, thereby reducing the enemy's ability to advance into the Dnipropetrovsk region. And unfortunately, the difficult situation persists in the Kostiantynivka and Lyman directions.
The occupiers are trying to create an operational encirclement of the Ukrainian Defense Forces units in the Kostiantynivka direction. Pressure is being applied from three sides: from Toretsk, specifically from Boyev Rayon, Delyevok and Yabunika, and accordingly in the Chasiv Yar direction. In addition, the occupiers are trying to break through the Ukrainian Defense Forces lines along the Pokrovka-Kostiantynivka highway. At the moment, the occupiers control the commanding heights in Toretsk and Chasiv Yar, which allows them to keep not only the urban outskirts of Kostiantynivka under fire control, but also, accordingly, the operational rear of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. There is further advancement of the occupiers in the direction of Siversk, and there is also movement of the occupiers in the Serebryansky forest.
Right now, the main thing for the Ukrainian defenders is not to give the enemy even the slightest respite. The coordinated actions of the defense forces show that any attempt by the enemy to break through and gain a foothold ends in failure.
Urgent. Putin in the military. Laughter through tears. The bunker dictator made a fool of himself at the West 2025 exercise and managed to embarrass himself in front of everyone. You'll be shocked when you hear what happened there, and meanwhile, Trump in London is about to turn everything upside down. A crucial decision has been made regarding Ukraine. Shock. British fighter jets are urgently taking off. All the details coming up next.
The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin appeared in military uniform on the final day of the Russian-Belarusian exercise West 2025. This is the second time the Kremlin's master has appeared in public not in a suit but in camouflage.
This is a mistaken statement, so-called if there is any military speech here at all. The point is that the Russian dictator is trying to keep up appearances in a bad situation. On September 15th, the Belarusian Ministry of Defense reported that American military personnel had arrived at a Belarusian airfield where joint Russian-Belarusian exercises were taking place. Moreover, they were personally received by the Minister of Defense of the Republic of Belarus, Viktor Krenin. And it should be noted that this visit by the American military and their meeting with the Minister of Defense of the Republic of Belarus is in fact a signal to the Russian Federation, both from the United States and from the Republic of Belarus, indicating a warming of relations between the US and the Republic of Belarus. Putin appears on September 16th in the Nizhny Novgorod region at the Mulino training ground, where the final stage of these exercises is taking place. This is what it's all about. This is essentially the Russian Federation's response to the actions of the United States.
Meanwhile, while Putin was supposedly saving an ally since, as he himself declared, his goal was to protect the Union state from any aggression, partisans from the Tesh movement paralyzed a railway junction near Yekaterinburg. It is reported that there are disruptions in the movement of trains and convoys in all strategic directions. In particular, this junction was used to deliver ammunition, armored vehicles, fuel and personnel to the front, as well as to service factories and warehouses in the north and east. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, is threatening foreign military personnel who may be present on Ukrainian territory as part of peacekeeping missions.
By forming so-called peacekeeping forces, which are in fact occupying forces, and by discussing the creation of an airless zone, a no-fly zone over Ukraine, there are now debates about whether it is permissible to shoot down objects over Ukraine.
The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, stated that our country has stopped 3 Russian offensive campaigns. However, the occupying country is planning 2 more. Zelensky said that the Russians have suffered heavy casualties and lost a large amount of equipment, which is why they are currently under a lot of stress. According to the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, in the first 8.5 months of 2025, Ukrainian defenders have eliminated more than 305,000 Russian army servicemen. This figure demonstrates the effectiveness of defensive actions and the high professionalism of the Ukrainian troops, Syrsky emphasized.
As for the failed nature of the Russian occupation army's summer plan, it refers to its non-fulfillment. Specifically, the political level objectives set before the Russian military command. Namely,
a Russian fishing vessel ended up in the strait near Sweden, allegedly due to engine problems. As a result, the Swedish Coast Guard and 2 NATO ships from Denmark and the United Kingdom launched a security operation.
we will now demonstrate and investigate whether the Russian Federation is using this for extensive radioactivity, or for the purpose of launching unmanned aerial vehicles, or for the more serious act of tampering with important cables on the bottom of the Baltic Sea, a pattern of activity that has been repeatedly demonstrated by the occupiers in the past. It is also important to mention that at the same time there were in fact multiple reports from several different NATO countries on the very same day Russian drones reportedly violated their sovereign airspace. And over Poland, German special forces boarded another cargo ship with a crew from the Russian Federation in the Kiel Canal, which, according to German intelligence services, was used to launch UAVs on German territory.
Shelling near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was recorded by the IAEA team. After the shells hit, observers recorded black holes in 3 places near the plant.
The Russian Federation uses provocations of this kind at energy infrastructure sites, especially at high-risk facilities such as nuclear power plants, to create the image of Ukraine as a terrorist state and, accordingly, to justify the possibility of implementing its national doctrine regarding the preemptive use of nuclear weapons.
The fighters in the special unit began placing wire in the pipe through which the occupiers are trying to get into Kupiansk. 3 pipes through which the occupiers could sneak onto Ukrainian-controlled territory have been blown up. The 4th one, as we can see, is under full Ukrainian control.
The Verkhovna Rada has ratified the agreement on a century-long partnership with the United Kingdom. The agreement is aimed at deepening ties in the fields of security and defense and strengthening the partnership for future generations.
I am proud to say on behalf of the United Kingdom that we stand with you not only today or tomorrow, this year or next, but for the next 100 years.
This is an important element for us, of course, because they believe that Ukraine is an important part of European security. And the good, traditionally strong relations between our President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, Starmer, and the British political establishment as a whole are an important element of such cooperation.
In addition, the United Kingdom plans to open its largest drone manufacturing plant in 2026. The plant will produce Storm Shroud drones, which are already in service with Britain for delivery, including to Ukraine.
This year, the United Kingdom will increase its drone deliveries to Ukraine tenfold, from 10,000 last year to 100,000 this year.
Such drone production is absolutely and completely justified, because it is clear that everyone understands that a great many drones will be needed right now. This has essentially become a drone war, not a conventional war of airplanes, not a traditional war of tanks, or a war of heavy artillery. And what's more, this type of production will be supported by guaranteed purchase orders coming at the very least from the European market, and this will continue for many, many years to come, which ultimately gives it very bright future prospects.
But still, the value of the United Kingdom for Ukraine lies not so much in military support as in political backing. The British are doing everything possible to keep US President Trump on their side. To this end, they even involved the King of England. For the first time in history, Trump and First Lady Melania will be officially received at Windsor Castle.
The principal value of Great Britain is not necessarily found in the mass supply of military weapons. but rather it is very often found in its particular political stance and global leadership. This is because many other nations frequently look to Britain as a leading example to follow. And at this moment, Britain is becoming an especially important element in the diplomatic interactions between the United States and the countries of Europe. Because for some reason, this is exactly how Trump is building this communication. Not wanting, for example, to communicate directly with Ursula von der Leyen and the European Union when we talk about security guarantees for Ukraine, we immediately recall, right, the coalition of willing countries. And who was their initiator? Britain and France?
The company Rheinmetall also hinted that they are supplying Ukraine with a new secret drone, the FV-014. It is known that the drone has a strike range of up to 100 kilometers. It can fly in a swarm, and it has somehow already been tested in combat.
Is this simply a prototype, or is it in fact already some kind of serially produced version? Because so much of the information is still completely shrouded in the fog of war, and as a result, both the testing and production of this particular loitering munition remain almost entirely unclear to the public. The real question is whether Rheinmetall actually has these new loitering munitions, or if they are only planning to scale up their production, and indeed just how effective they are. These are all questions that remain unanswered for now.
In addition to the presumed supply of drones, the company is also actively assisting Ukraine with countermeasure systems.
New Skyranger drone interception systems will be in Ukraine as early as this year. Right now we can produce up to 100 of them per year, but we plan to increase that number to 200. Each system can cover an area of up to 4 square kilometers and shoot down all drones within that radius.
The line between opposing sides stretches for a great distance, tens of kilometers, and there is no equipment there, no tanks, because a tank costs millions, tens of millions of dollars, and it can be destroyed by a drone costing just $20,000. These things are simply incomparable.
The current military situation shows that the future belongs to drones. And it is very important that Ukraine's key partners understand this and are constantly ramping up production.
Shock and apocalypse for Putin's oil empire, a blow the Kremlin did not expect. Ukrainian drones have turned a key enemy facility to ashes. Russia is in a deep gasoline collapse. Gas stations are running empty, panic is growing, and the front is running out of fuel. This is not just a blow, it's the beginning of an energy catastrophe for Moscow. All the details coming up.
Production shutdowns, disruptions at enterprises, fuel crisis, gasoline shortages, kilometer-long lines at gas stations, the introduction of ration cards, and record price hikes. The fuel shortage is hitting Russia harder than it is the wallets of officials. And it's all thanks to drones and IEDs, which have already knocked out a sixth of all oil refineries in Russia. The crisis arrived even before the end of the year.
And here's a very long line at the mill, spilling right out onto the road. She won't even have enough gas in the tank to wait it out.
In the past, issues with the fuel supply were generally only observed in places such as the Saratov region and the Far East. After that, the shortage was recorded in the Nizhny Novgorod, Rostov and Ryazan regions, as well as in Crimea.
Friends, comrades, what's going on? There's no connection. Telegram isn't working. WhatsApp isn't working either. I came to the gas station to fill up, but they say they're out of gas. Now they're only giving it out with coupons. What do you mean, with coupons? What's happening? Have we gone back to the Soviet Union?
You wanted to go back to the USSR, and now you got it. There are already fuel shortages in more than 20 regions.
We've got more problems here. Fuel shortages have started in Kamensk-Shakhtinsky too. Now, just to fill up your car here, you have to wait in a line that's at least a kilometer long. That's about 60 or 70 cars at a single gas station. By the time it's your turn, you pull up and there's no gas left. In
occupied Donetsk, there's no 95 octane at the gas stations. And the prices for hot food are much higher than in Moscow itself.
There's no water in Donetsk. Now, in many places, there's no gasoline at all. Or the gas is 85 rubles a liter. People get used to everything.
Residents of the occupied cities of Ukraine complain about long lines at gas stations and limits on the amount of fuel you can buy at one time with ration cards. For the most part, fuel is unavailable in the towns occupied by Russia since 2014. At the same time, there's also a gasoline crisis in occupied Mariupol. Prices are rising rapidly. Huge lines form at gas stations, with people waiting 2 or 3 hours. In Severodonetsk, Luhansk region, due to the gasoline shortage, only 2 buses are available for several routes. Oil traders report a severe shortage of gasoline and diesel fuel. Products are being released with a waiting time of 3 to 4 or even 5 to 7 days. In Russia, they continue to lie to citizens, claiming that the possible reason is seasonal fuel price increases and a rise in tourist activity. But as we can see, Ukrainian drones have proven far more effective than any plan from the Ministry of Economic Development. Another plant was hit, the largest Russian oil refinery in the Leningrad region. The Kryvsky oil refinery is among Russia's top 10 and processes about 21 million tons of oil per year. It produces gasoline, diesel, fuel oil, and aviation fuel. And here is the Ryazan oil refinery giant, which belongs to Rosneft. It processes over 13 million tons of oil per year. Since the beginning of August, 2 units there had already been completely shut down after previous strikes, and now the entire plant is operating at half capacity. Journalists calculated that in 2025, drones struck Russian oil refineries 38 times, and 24 of those attacks were successful. Refineries either stopped some units for repairs or completely halted fuel production. 5 plants have already been shut down: Kuibyshev, Novokuibyshev, Syzran, and Rosneft's Kladylitsa. The same fate befell Volgograd, Lukoil, and Afipsky.
The most effective sanctions are those that work the fastest. That's fire, Russian oil refineries, terminals, and oil depots.
The fuel crisis has also been worsened by Russia's budget problems, which have made gasoline sales unprofitable for companies. Even in remote regions of Russia where Ukrainian drones do not reach, there is also a shortage of fuel. Putin does not comment on the situation at all because he is hiding it. The Kremlin can no longer provide compensation from the state budget to the companies. This year, Russia has a budget deficit, and as of today, it already exceeds 5 trillion rubles. Thanks to Putin, who started the war, and as of today, it already exceeds 5 trillion rubles.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
A scandal. Trump rocked Europe. The White House leader gave allies a cold shower. He harshly accused EU countries of fueling Putin's war machine. Something unexpected surfaced, and it blew up online. Which European leader became a sponsor of the Kremlin? The whole truth is in the report.
Europe only talks but doesn't act. These are the words of Donald Trump, which sound like a direct challenge to NATO allies and the European Union. The American president publicly accused European countries of not imposing tough enough sanctions against Russia and essentially set conditions. If Europe does not increase pressure on Moscow, Washington may suspend its own actions.
Europe is my friend, but they buy oil from Russia, so you can't expect us to be the only ones acting at full strength.
The White House is no longer willing to cover for the passivity of its allies. For the first time in a long while, an issue that has long been discussed behind closed doors is coming to the surface. Who is really bearing the main burden of confronting the Kremlin today, the US or Europe?
They buy oil from Russia. We don't buy oil from Russia. They buy a lot of oil from Russia. This is not a deal.
Trump's statement was a response to calls from European politicians to the United States and personally to President Trump to increase pressure on Russia, to strengthen sanctions against Russia, including those targeting Russian energy resources. So Trump responded irritably, showing his annoyance rather aggressively, specifically towards the European partners. As if to say, there's no need to urge me to strengthen sanctions against Russia. Look at yourselves. You yourselves are buying Russian energy resources. I'll say right away, Trump's reactions are not entirely fair. And it's not aimed at forcing the Europeans to increase pressure on Russia. Rather, it's more of a refusal, a demonstration that Trump himself does not want to impose any new additional sanctions against Russia. It's a reaction based on the "you're just as bad" principle. In other words, you're demanding that I impose sanctions against Russia, but why don't you do it yourselves first, and then I'll see whether I do it or not.
According to European statistics, after the full-scale invasion, the flow of Russian energy resources to the EU did indeed decrease, but it did not disappear.
I'm ready to impose sanctions, but they need to strengthen their own sanctions so that they match the ones I'm imposing. I'm ready to move forward, but they have to do it. I think they will. But right now, they're just talking, they're not acting, and they're still buying oil from Russia.
It's not the European Union that's buying Russian oil. Right now in Europe, or more precisely in the European Union, only 2 countries are buying Russian oil. Let me remind you, there are sanctions and restrictions in the European Union on Russian oil, including Russian gas. These sanctions are not absolute because when they first started imposing them back in 2022, several countries didn't implement them right away since the EU wasn't ready to immediately give up Russian oil and gas. This happened gradually, but starting around 2023, the vast majority of European Union countries stopped buying Russian oil and Russian pipeline gas. Nevertheless, 2 countries managed to secure an exception for themselves. Sometimes they achieved this by even resorting to blackmailing the European Union, including on issues related to sanctions policy. They secured the right to continue receiving Russian oil, which has been supplied to Europe since Soviet times via the Druzhba pipeline.
As you've probably already guessed, these countries are Hungary and Slovakia. Yes, the volumes there are incomparable to pre-war levels, but even these purchases help fuel the Russian war machine. And in this regard, Trump's criticism seems justified.
However, who are we talking about? About politicians who are directly influenced by Trump. And one of these politicians, for example, Mr. Hungary, Viktor Orban, a close friend of Trump. That's why Trump shouldn't be criticizing some abstract Europe, but should directly address his friend, who would definitely listen to Trump and say to him, "Viktor, you're still buying Russian oil. How come? Come on, stop this outrage immediately. Yes, you're helping Russia in its war against Ukraine." And I'm sure, in fact, I'm quite confident, that maybe not right away, of course, maybe with some necessary transitional periods to work through, but at the end of the day, Orban would find he would have to listen to Trump. By the way, they are already taking additional measures regarding gas, first and foremost, and I think there are already preliminary agreements on oil as well. Everyone will gradually switch to other energy sources because they see that the situation is changing. They don't want to enter into a direct conflict with Trump, but Trump is putting pressure not on Orban, not on Fico. He's putting pressure on the Europeans, on the European Union, and on the major European countries. And there is a certain injustice in this.
There's another problem as well, Russian liquefied gas. Formally, Europe does not purchase it directly, but through intermediaries and bypass schemes, the money still ends up in Moscow. As a result, the continent is only partially cutting off the Kremlin's oxygen supply.
But they say, we can't refuse it, we have to replace it with something, otherwise there will be problems, internal economic problems.
Now the situation looks like this. Trump has given the allies an ultimatum, either take synchronized steps or Washington will slow down its own pressure on the Kremlin. And this disrupts the usual balance of Western strategy, where the US led and Europe followed. Now, however, the US president is demanding reciprocity. Europe must take the first step itself, or the Americans will wait.
When Trump makes such statements, he is not so much pursuing political goals. The police are present here, but more as a precaution, not so that he gets blamed, but so that the Europeans sort things out themselves. But above all, his goals are commercial. He wants Europe, especially in terms of gas purchases, to be dependent on the United States for energy. Of course, Trump is concerned about the war in Ukraine. He wants the war in Ukraine to end. But in this case, he is acting purely out of self-interest for the trade interests of the United States.
For Ukraine, this is both an opportunity and a risk at the same time. If Europe, under pressure from Washington, does decide to take radical steps, the Kremlin will lose billions. But if the dispute drags on, it is Ukraine that will become the first victim of this indecision.
All this debate will become an additional factor, an extra argument for reducing and gradually phasing out purchases of Russian oil and gas. But as for gas, there is already a decision in place that applies until 2027. The European Union had already made the decision to stop purchasing Russian gas even before all these statements from Trump. It's just that this will happen gradually in order to prepare technologically and economically. But now this process might be somewhat accelerated. Where else might there be a positive consequence? And the first steps have already been taken here. The US and Europe may begin consultations and negotiations on jointly developing sanctions against Russia.
Now, the most important thing is for the US and Europe to stay in sync, because any sign of weakness will give the Kremlin a chance to expand its aggression.
Shock and explosion among Putin's inner circle. The Kremlin is engulfed in a bloody power struggle. Kadyrov's men are clashing fiercely with the Orthodox oligarch Malofeev. It's all about influence, money, and the future of the regime. This split could blow up Putin's entire inner circle. To find out how this battle ends, watch our report.
Ramzan Kadyrov's final act. The dying Don Don is preparing some real action for the Kremlin. The public channel Shpion, known for its information leaks, reports that in Grozny, people are tired of Moscow ignoring their demands to curb the activities of the ultra-right, nationalist, xenophobic, and anti-migrant organization Russian community.
The guys have banded together to protect themselves and defend their homeland from the many enemies of the people.
The Russian community emerged in Russia at the end of 2020. Its unofficial leader is considered to be the permanent head of the investigative committee, Bastrykin, while its curator is said to be the Orthodox millionaire Konstantin Malofeev. The Russian community is known for its fight against labor migrants. It has a huge number of social media pages, including on platforms banned in Russia. On their channels, the ultra-right promote their ideas and post videos of their confrontations with newcomers to Russia. In many regions of the country, there are these so-called vigilante groups. Dressed in uniforms and balaclavas, young men go on raids together with the police.
When will they finally introduce a visa regime and full control over all arrivals from Central Asia? How many more Russian children and women have to be raped by migrants? How many men have been killed? We are facing a real war here, I'm not exaggerating. I'm telling you, a war right in Russian cities. This fire has already reached our land. People, wake up, foreigners are maiming and killing us. The worst is yet to come, because there are about 600,000 migrant children in Russia who do not attend school. This is an uncontrolled environment where crime, Wahhabism, separatism, and terrorism are being formed. Who and when will start cleaning up this Augean stable, of course?
The exodus of the Russian community began after the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. At the moment, more than 150 regional and city cells and organizations have been announced, and its supporters are among the first to report to the authorities. Besides turning on their own, Russians are venting their anger on migrants, many of whom are Chechens, and this has already started to seriously annoy the Kadyrov clan. According to sources in Grozny, they have decided to launch a campaign of so-called reverse discrimination. In response to the Russian community, the fading Don Don has come up with his own project.
The first focal points will be precisely those cities where the Russian community is actively filming and spreading videos humiliating Chechens. Branches of the movement will start appearing in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Yekaterinburg, and later, according to Kadyrov's plan, across the entire country. At the same time, in Chechnya itself, there is already discussion about creating headquarters to coordinate campaigns, including through social networks and religious centers.
Here is the presentation of Kadyrov's idea. On the page of Apti Alaudinov, there was a repost of publications from the newly created group Community of Friendship of Peoples.
An important step towards uniting the true patriots of our country. I, Maxim Baranov, am the head of this project. The creation of such a space is entirely my own initiative. My respected elder brother, assistant to the head of the Chechen Republic, hero of Russia, commander of the Akhmat Special Forces, Apti Aron and Chalodinov, is supporting me in this important undertaking. But it is important to understand that he is not the leader of Obshchina, and we encourage everyone who shares our values and is ready to contribute to the development of our homeland to join the ranks of true patriots.
And even though the head of the Community of Friendship of Peoples tries to distance himself from Alaudinov, his influence is clearly evident in all the group's few publications. Here, for example, is a rather pitiful attempt by Apti to show that all nationalities in Russia are united.
I am Chechen by nationality and my religion is Islam. So who do we have here?
Mustafa.
Mustafa. What's your nationality? Russian. Russian Mustafa.
Yes.
I see. And where are you originally from?
From Ramenskoye, near Moscow.
Near Moscow? Alright, please. Here is our Russian Mustafa.
I seem to have some Caucasian features, probably makes it necessary for me to be here. Well, of course. I don't get offended because I'm Chechen or from Grozny, but...
Why would you be offended? Isn't it fine?
I'm actually proud of it.
There you go. Do you see? Well done. So, Mustafa is Russian by nationality. Text. I want to show you this. So, teacher. And to you too. Capture list. What is your nationality? Lizgin. Lizgin, please. So, what is your nationality? Russian? Russian. Where are you from?
Ulyanovskaya region.
Ulyanovskaya region. Please. So.
Hamster. Couple, forget the edge.
Please. Well, of course. Doesn't it look like Chemiche? Too healthy. Ha 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 ha. Good speaking. Russian by nationality. Russian. Please.
Marvelous. Russian by nationality. In the Rostov region, according to insider information, Grozny is launching a large-scale PR campaign involving activists who will begin to disrupt the actions of the Russian community and create a counter-narrative. Sources clarify that the structure will operate like a mobile network of headquarters. At the same time, the activists will demonstratively support other minorities as well, for informational effect. The main goal is unity, to create the impression among the audience that Kadyrov's project protects everyone. Meanwhile, the Russian community is not a group of neo-Nazis disguised as patriots.
The Kadyrovites will test the pilot of the Friendship of People's community in Moscow. Adam Delimkanov will be responsible for the community's influence in the capital. After that, the network will spread across the regions of Russia. Of course, that's if they win the first battles with the Russian community. At the very least, even if the fight hasn't been accepted yet, they've shown that their activities in Chechnya have been noticed. On their public page, they mock the leader's clothing and refer to him only as Boran Maximov.
That's all for now. For more news from the front lines, tune in to the next episode.